In the 1880s, Henri Rousseau spent his days standing at the edge of Paris. As a toll collector at the city gates, his reality was strictly defined by cargo manifests, uniforms, and the rigid bureaucratic order of the French customs service. He was in his 40s, he had never been to art school, he had no formal training in draftsmanship, and he lacked any professional background in painting. In 19th-century Paris, this meant he was entirely locked out of the fine art establishment. The academic salon system was a highly exclusive world that had no place for a middle-aged, working-class toll collector. Because the gates of the establishment were close to him, he remained unburdened by their rules. He was free to ignore the technical conventions that every other painter in the city spent years trying to master. Rousseau began painting on his weekends. To find an audience, he submitted his canvases to the Salon des Indépendants, an open exhibition with no jury, where anyone paying a small fee could show their work. The response was brutal. For decades, the Parisian critics treated his work as a running joke. They published reviews describing his technique as clumsy, his style as childlike, and his compositions as mathematically wrong. The critics were judging him against the strict academic standards of the era. A proper painting required elements to scale correctly, shadows to reflect a logical light source, and backgrounds to recede neatly toward a vanishing point. Instead of adapting to these standards, Rousseau began a scrapbook. He clipped out the reviews that mocked him, pasted down, and continued to paint with a persistent, unironic confidence. Rousseau's legacy rests on his role as a painter of deep, exotic jungles, yet he never actually left France. His tropical wilderness was a local construction. On his days off, he walked to the Paris Botanical Gardens and sketched the broad-leafed plants and towering palms trapped inside the glass and iron walls of the city's public greenhouses. To populate these forests, he studied the stiff taxidermy displays in the Natural History Museum and traced illustrations of animals out of popular magazines. Rousseau's jungles grew through an accumulation of these isolated fragments. He reordered the city's greenhouses and museum cases into a synthesized, highly artificial world of his own making. You can see the result in this 1897 painting, The Sleeping Gypsy. The composition breaks so many academic rules that when Rousseau offered it to his own hometown as a gift, the mayor firmly rejected it. The lion looming over the sleeping woman is disproportionate to her body, creating an impossible scale. Additionally, the moonlight flooding the desert has no clear source. The heavy black shadows falling beneath the mandolin and the lion's paws contradict the moon in the sky. These technical departures strip the scene of real-world logic. By refusing to obey the laws of physics, Rousseau achieved an absolute, suspended stillness that makes the painting impossible to forget. In November 1908, the highest ranks of the Parisian avant-garde gathered in Pablo Picasso's Montmartre studio. They threw a banquet for Rousseau that began as a celebration tinged with irony. The room was filled with cynical, highly sophisticated young artists. At the center of the table sat the 64-year-old customs officer, cheerfully playing his violin for a crowd that considered him a naive novelty. But as the artists analyzed his canvases throughout the evening, their perspective shifted. They recognized that his flattened, warped spaces functioned as a deliberate displacement of reality. While a trained artist is taught to build deep, receding backgrounds, Rousseau crushed everything forward. He pushed every leaf and animal right against the front of the frame. This total enclosure was a technical impossibility for a trained painter. Their eyes were too disciplined by the rules of perspective to produce this flat, airless intensity. Rousseau's lack of training functioned as a permission the professional eye could not grant itself. This logic reached its peak in his 1910 canvas, The Dream, the largest and most ambitious painting he ever produced. In the middle of the dense, glowing wilderness, Rousseau placed an ornate red velvet sofa and a reclining woman. He offered no logical explanation for why domestic furniture was sitting in the middle of a jungle. He bypassed rationality entirely, presenting the unedited imagery of a dream as a valid reality. Rousseau exhibited this painting at the Salon and died 3 months later in a public hospital. He left behind a stack of unpaid debts and only a few brief obituaries. Within a decade of his death, the new Surrealist movement claimed him as their founding father. These artists spent years trying to artificially unlearn the academic habits that Rousseau never possessed. Today, his work hangs in the Museum of Modern Art, no longer a subject of mockery, but a cornerstone of the modern artistic mind. The customs officer at the gate had documented the visual logic of dreams years before the art world had a name for it, or a movement to claim it as their own.